Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
WHO has been assessing this outbreak around the clock that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
The high level of anxiety.
China withheld crucial data on the origin of the pandemic. The possibility of the virus leaking from a lab cannot be ruled out. China needs to come clean on what it has. None of these things are news. We've been through them over and over again on this show. But this is our cover story tonight because the WHO and its chief, the one and only Dr. Tedros, has said so in so many words. The WHO has released its probe report, 124 pages long, but without any answers. It still doesn't know the source of the virus. It still cannot conclude on the origin. Perhaps it never will. Expecting China to cooperate now would be naive. Expecting the WHO to take a tough stand would be asking for too much. But expecting the world to make China pay is a fair demand, we think. Guess the world leaders need motivation stronger than a killer pandemic to get their act together. Some countries have again called out China. Some others are working on an alliance to deal with future pandemics. And still others are suffering China's continued aggressiveness. On Gravitas tonight, we'll give you a lowdown. Also on the show, yesterday we told you about America's human rights hypocrisy, and today we have the same America releasing a report card of other countries. We'll look at what it says about India and why. Saudi Arabia is giving a $3.2 trillion booster shot to its economy as the kingdom tries to pivot away from oil. Private investments have shot up. And Brazil's president is on a firing spree as his country suffers from the ravages of the pandemic. Now the army has come into the picture. We'll tell you all about it. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Continuing its vaccine diplomacy, India has supplied 25,000 doses of made-in-India coronavirus vaccines to Palestine. India's External Affairs Minister tweeted saying the vaccines had arrived in Palestine. Pfizer-BioNTech announced that their vaccine showed 100% efficacy against the coronavirus in 12 to 15-year-olds. Phase 3 trials among adolescents in the US demonstrated 100% efficacy. The vaccine maker is eyeing approval for adolescents to get the jabs before the next school year. Mozambique's defense ministry has deployed troops to the town of Palma in an effort to gain control of the area, following an attack that saw dozens killed. Tens of thousands of people are feared to have been displaced. Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez's brother Tony Hernandez was sentenced to life in prison by a New York judge for large-scale drug trafficking. The prosecutors have named President Hernandez as a co-conspirator, but has not been formally charged by the U.S. judicial system. Biden administration has announced a set of measures responding to rising anti-Asian violence, deploying $49.5 million from COVID-19 relief funds for U.S. community programs that help victims. President Biden tweeted saying, "We can't be silent in the face of rising violence against Asian Americans." The time required to close the gender gap has increased by 36 years, according to the World Economic Forum's 2021 Global Gender Gap Report, which estimates that it will take an average of 135.6 years for women and men to reach parity on a range of factors. The economic gender gap will take 268 years to close. The cockpit voice recorder from a crashed Indonesian passenger jet has been found, more than 2 months after the accident that killed all 62 passengers and crew. Trouble is mounting for the Biden administration as more Honduran migrants set out for the Guatemalan border to reach the United States. The southern border is presenting Biden with a major humanitarian challenge after record numbers of unaccompanied migrant children arrived at the border. European champions Portugal needed to come from a goal down to see off minnows Luxembourg 3-1 in their 2022 FIFA World Cup qualifier. Goals from Diogo Jota and Cristiano Ronaldo either side of halftime helped Portugal overturn the deficit, while substitute João Palhinha added a third goal late on. Meanwhile, world number 1 Belgium moved 3 points clear at the top of their group with an 8-0 drubbing of Belarus that was achieved with a second-string side. World number 1 Ashley Barty is through to the semi-finals of the Miami Open for the second straight edition after a battling victory over 7th seed Aryna Sabalenka. The Australian top seed saved all 7 break points that she faced in the match and broke Sabalenka's serve twice in a high-quality match to win 6-4, 6-7, 6-3. She will now face 5th seed Elina Svitolina, who beat Latvia's Anastasia Sevastova in straight sets. "385 days ago, the World Health Organization declared the Wuhan virus outbreak a pandemic. As of today, 128 million cases have been recorded, close to 3 million people have died. This is one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. But even after 385 days, the world doesn't know how it began. The question of the origin has still not been settled. This should have been a foregone conclusion. The world knows the pandemic began in Wuhan in China, but the WHO team that spent 27 days in Wuhan still does not have the answers. Their probe, they say, was inconclusive. The much anticipated report is finally out. It is 124-page long. The report is high on details but low on substance. In fact, the investigation raises more questions than it answers. Let's tell you the 5 key findings of this report. The team looked into 3 possibilities. 1, the virus jumped from animals to humans. 2, it arrived in Wuhan through food chains. Now that's a claim that China has aggressively tried to push, but it hasn't found much support. And the 3rd possibility, the virus leaked from a laboratory. Now the WHO team says they found maximum evidence for the first possibility. That is, the virus jumped from animals to humans. So that's the most likely cause, according to them. They say the virus probably emerged in bats before spreading to humans through a quote-unquote intermediate animal. What does this mean? What is this intermediate? Well, they have no answers again. In other words, the exact source of the virus is still not clear. The WHO team says they do not have enough evidence to pinpoint the exact source yet. What about the role of animal markets? The so-called wet markets of China, no clear answers there either. Remember, the initial confirmed cases were linked to the Huanan seafood market, the same market that China had subsequently shut down. The WHO team found that many early cases had no clear connection to the Huanan market. So probably the virus was already spreading around Wuhan. But the question is, if the market was not linked to the outbreak, why did China shut it down? And finally, the last key finding, and perhaps the most controversial one, the possibility of a lab leak. The WHO team says a leak is quote-unquote highly unlikely. But here comes the twist in the tale. Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the World Health Organization, made an interesting statement. On Tuesday, he was heard contradicting, some say, several of the key findings of the probe team. He said the lab leak might be, and I'm quoting, the least likely hypothesis. But it still needs further investigation, meaning do not rule it out yet. Let me quote from what he said. Dr. Tedros. He said the team also visited several laboratories in Wuhan and considered the possibility that the virus entered the human population as a result of a laboratory incident.
However, I do not believe that this assessment was exhaustive enough. In other words, this should be probed further. He also said the WHO is ready to deploy more resources for further investigations. Well, here's what we think. For future investigations, he said, and this is what we say. We are already in that future. The investigation should have happened by now. The WHO has already botched up enough. But the fact that Dr. Tedros is saying what he is welcome change. He also made a revelation, which technically was not a revelation. The WHO chief said the probe team had difficulty in accessing raw data in Wuhan. Who was holding back that raw data? China. What is China's response to these statements? The same old denial. With Dr. Tedros keeping the lab theory alive, Chinese experts today deflected all questions on the subject. When asked about the sharing of data, the Chinese scientist who was involved with the WHO team in Wuhan said that some data cannot leave the country because of privacy reasons.
Of course, according to Chinese law, some data cannot be taken away or photographed. But when we were analyzing it together in Wuhan, everyone could see the database, the materials. It was all done together. For example, some data that involves patient privacy and requires the patient to know and agree, this is a legal requirement. I think this is also a basic international rule.
Imagine China talking about basic international rules. At the same time, Chinese diplomats remain very combative in their defense. We'll tell you more about it in just a bit. First, let's tell you how the world is reacting to this WHO report. High-profile WHO member states have slammed it. Yesterday, the United States and 13 other governments released a joint statement. The list includes the United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea and Australia, which also happens to be the first country that demanded an international investigation. Now, these countries have questioned why China is withholding data.
The report lacks crucial data, information, and access. It represents a partial and incomplete picture. There's a second stage in this process that we believe should be led by international and independent experts. They should have unfettered access to data. They should be able to ask questions of people who are on the ground at this point in time, and that's a step the WHO could take.
That was the White House press secretary. The U.S. wants the WHO to bring in independent experts to take this investigation forward. Needless to say, Beijing is not warming up to that idea. So basically, no one is happy with the WHO probe. If the pandemic has taught the world anything, it is this. The world is not ready to deal with a pandemic. The existing institutions are too weak and ineffective when it comes to demanding accountability. So leaders of 23 countries have now come up with an idea, an international treaty to deal with future health emergencies. What is this all about? Our next report explains.
$2.8 million. That's the number of people who have died worldwide after they contracted the Wuhan virus. More than a year after the pandemic began, the world still doesn't know about the origins of the virus. There is a shortage of vaccines. In February, 130 countries did not even have a single shot. The world's leading powers remain divided in the fight against the pandemic. As the struggle continues, 23 leaders believe it's time for a reset. They want a new international treaty for pandemic preparedness and response. The idea has been pitched through a piece in the Telegraph newspaper. It was first proposed by the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, at the G20 summit in November last year. Now, 22 more leaders have pooled their ideas and co-signed this piece. The leaders want to foster what they call an all-of-government and all-of-society approach, which includes strengthening national, regional and global capacities, enhancing international cooperation to improve alert systems, data sharing, research and production of medicines, vaccines, diagnostics and personal protection equipment, There is special emphasis on the need for transparency. The list of endorsers includes some high-profile names: British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, French President Emmanuel Macron, Chancellor of Germany Angela Merkel, and Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, the Director General of the World Health Organization.
Without an internationally coordinated, all of government, all of society, One Health approach to pandemic preparedness and response, we remain vulnerable. It has shown how much we need a universal commitment to basic public health principles as the foundation for our work to prevent, detect, and respond to epidemic and pandemic threats. The idea behind the proposal for such a treaty is to systematically tackle the gaps exposed by COVID-19.
Formal negotiations for the pact haven't begun yet, but the WHO is keen on taking the first steps. On Tuesday, Dr. Tedros said a draft resolution could be presented to WHO member states in May during the annual meeting of the World Health Body. The idea has takers. It has critics too, like the United States, which says this is not the right time to negotiate a global treaty.
23 countries have signed on to the idea of this WHO treaty that would improve information sharing during future pandemics. Why hasn't the U.S. signed on to that?
We do have some concerns primarily about the timing and launching into negotiations for a new treaty right now, and we believe that could divert attention away from substantive issues regarding the response, preparedness for future pandemic threats.
The pandemic has left world leaders divided. 14 countries are already challenging the findings of a WHO team tasked with finding the origins of the Wuhan virus. Getting world powers to agree to an international treaty now will be a tall ask. Bureau Report, World is One.
China remains firmly in the dock. How does it respond? By relying on the old saying, offense is the best form of defense. That is China's strategy, clearly. It is offensive in diplomacy, in business, on borders, and on the high seas. The more serious the charges, the more offensive China becomes. Here is what it is trying to do right now. Pin the blame on the US. In fact, China has been at it for a while now, pushing a conspiracy theory that the virus originated in America, not in Wuhan. It's a disinformation campaign aimed at shifting the blame and the narrative. This campaign was crafted by this man, Zhao Lijian, the spokesperson of Chinese Foreign Ministry. On the 12th of March 2020, Zhao posted this. It may be the US Army who brought the epidemic to Wuhan, he said. Soon, Chinese mouthpiece, the Global Times, was roped in to spread the virus of fake news. 15th of March 2020, this article was published. US urged to explain military lab shutdown. 23rd of April 2020, another headline, scientists unable to judge if US lab is virus source due to lack of government response. 26th of April, the same year, was the US military victim or spreader of the virus? 14th of May 2020, China, Russia can initiate probe of US biolabs. Do you see where this is going? A concerted effort to show America as the source of the virus. Alas, China found no takers. What it got instead was a probe team knocking on its doors. In January 2021, after much back and forth, China finally allowed a WHO probe team to enter Wuhan. On ground, China hid data. On social media, China revived its fake news campaign. A hashtag was floated on Chinese micro-blogging platform Weibo. The target was a US lab at Fort Detrick. The demand was very clear: investigate the American lab for the origin of the virus. In January, Hua Chunying, a spokesperson for the Chinese Foreign Ministry, said, and I'm quoting again, "I'd like to stress that if the United States truly respects facts, it should open the biological lab at Fort Detrick, give more transparency to issues like its 200-plus overseas biolabs, invite WHO experts to conduct origin tracing in the United States, and respond to the concerns from the international community with real actions." Goes without saying that the international concern she was referring to is a figment of her imagination. China is finger-pointing without any evidence. Most experts agree that the virus originated in Wuhan in China. My question is, why did the World Health Organization not pull up China for spreading misinformation in times of a crisis? Why was it silent? Was a delayed response to the health crisis not damage enough? Why did the WHO chief, Dr. Tedros, add to it by not putting an end to China's blame game? Here is what it has come down to now. 1 year into the pandemic, the world is still looking for the source of the Wuhan virus. And after having interfered with the probe, China is unapologetically still pointing fingers at others. Let me once again read out what Hua Chunying, the same foreign ministry spokesperson, recently said. There is still a big question mark over the lab at Fort Detrick. We have also given media access to foreign journalists. But can the US side do the same and invite international experts and media for a visit in an open and above-board manner? This is coming from China. Well, here's the bitter truth. China will never give the world access to the source of the virus. And the blame for this lies equally with the WHO. It failed to put China in the same sentence as the Wuhan virus. And this failure has not only strengthened China further, it has made it more offensive. Here's what China is doing now, punishing international brands and unleashing terror on international waters. Brands like Nike, H&M, Adidas, Burberry, Calvin Klein, they're all being boycotted in China. They are being deleted from Chinese shopping apps. Do you know why? Because unlike the WHO, some of these brands dared to take a stand. They spoke about forced labor in Xinjiang in China, a region that produces 20% of the world's cotton. It is also home to the Uyghur concentration camps. China has forced at least 570,000 people in its forced labor program. This is according to the Center for Global Policy. Brands like H&M said it would no longer use cotton from Xinjiang. So China is arm twisting them, forcing them to reject reports of Uyghur genocide. H&M stores have been removed from maps. Huawei has removed Nike and Adidas from its app store. At least 6 H&M stores have been closed by the franchisee owners. Chinese e-commerce stores like Alibaba and Taobao have taken H&M, Nike and Adidas merchandise off their platforms. Chinese brand ambassadors have dumped these brands. The pressure is working. International brand Hugo Boss has already given in. The German luxury house took to Weibo to tell Chinese consumers that it will continue to buy cotton from Xinjiang. And this is the result of Chinese terror. Then we come to the high seas. Look at what Chinese maritime mafia is doing in South China Sea. Beijing has moored more than 200 vessels at the Whitsun Reef. The reef is claimed by China, the Philippines and Vietnam. Now, Chinese vessels have reached within Manila's 200-mile exclusive economic zone. Manila claims that these vehicles are being manned by Chinese maritime militia. There is a standoff on the seas. Vietnam is patrolling its coast guard. The Philippines has deployed its air force. China, meanwhile, is grabbing land at the Subi Reef too. It is being called a quote-unquote prelude to occupation. Satellite images suggest that China may be trying to build a tower in the contested reef. And this too, by the way, is Filipino territory. The moral of the story is this: terror, when left unchecked, only spreads further. It is important to call out China on the pandemic and make China pay, unless you want China to be more emboldened and more offensive. To Myanmar now. It's been exactly 2 months since the military seized power in Myanmar. 2 months of protests, of violence and killings. It's been an endless cycle of turmoil. The world is responding with sanctions now. The US has suspended all trade with Myanmar. The UK has partially cut off its dealings. The European Union has singled out those responsible for the killings. But none of this is working. The unrest persists. So does the crackdown. And it is increasingly becoming a problem for the neighborhood, especially for India and Thailand. The influx of refugees at the respective borders is growing by the day. Hundreds of civilians, activists and policemen are fleeing Myanmar to find refuge. The military is showing no restraint. Armed ethnic groups have come into the picture. A civil war looms. The question then is, how should New Delhi deal with the situation? How should the world deal with the situation? through dialogue or through sanctions? Also, what role is China playing here? Earlier, I spoke with Myanmar's Special Envoy to the UN, Dr. Sasa, and I asked him all these questions and more. Take a look at this conversation. Thank you for being with us today. Why are you wary of revealing your whereabouts? Do you fear for your life, sir?
Yes, I got a charge of high treason by the military generals who are committing the crime against humanity and high treason against the country of Myanmar every day. But I'm proud that I got a high treason charge because I stand for democracy and freedom for the people of Myanmar.
You've called upon the international community, and I'm quoting, to use any means necessary to reverse the coup. Are you, in effect, urging foreign powers to interfere in your country with force if needed?
Diplomatic approach has to be maximum, and we are now working very hard around the clock to make sure that there is international coalitions on Myanmar. And we are now asking all international community to come together and to put maximum pressure on this illegitimate military regime of Myanmar until they give up the power and give back democracy to the people of Myanmar. So when we means by all means all pressure.
What kind of assurances have you got from global leaders so far?
Now, U.S. government, through the leadership of Mr. President Biden administrations, they have sanctioned military companies that have stolen the wealth of the country and the people of Myanmar for many, many years. They get all those money stolen from the people of Myanmar, and they bought weapons from abroad and then kill the people of Myanmar. It should never happen again. So enough is enough. So now American administrations and British administrations, together with European unions, are leading the global leaderships to target the coordinated the sanction against the military regime, both diplomatically and economically.
Right. You've made some interesting points here. First of all, when you say targeted action from Europeans and Americans, it's basically sanctions. And sanctions have proved to be counterproductive so far because protesters are still being killed and the crackdown has only intensified. And all of these countries do not share a border with Myanmar as India does. The people who are fleeing the country, a lot of them are ending up in India. What should this global leadership effort look like then in your opinion? Should they talk to the junta or continue to use force?
Diplomacy is the right way to do, and they have to maximize all available options diplomatically. That means that we are asking international community to come together as united forces, as united coalitions, international effort, and we are asking strong, unified message from Washington, D.C., the same message from London, Brussels, Delhi, Beijing, and Tokyo, and ASEAN, so that it's unified and strong message to these military generals. Stop killing your own people. That is common sense. Not to kill our own children, not to kill the children, not to kill the women, not to kill these unarmed civilians.
Do you see a Chinese hand in the coup?
Even I can tell you that China is not happy with what's happening on the ground. Yeah, let's be clear. They want to have stable neighbor. And the same for India. You know, having stable neighbor is very important because India also have this side look east policy and look at the policy. So look at and look east policy will be work only when Myanmar become democratic country. When Myanmar become democratic and free country, that is good for India. That also good for China. More importantly, as India
this is not about India. I'm asking you a question specifically about China. Ambassador, I'm asking you about China. Do you see a Chinese hand in the coup?
Historically, always China is there helping, of course, all these military generals for many, many, many years. Yeah, let's clear about that. So now also they are talking to the military coup leaders. But what I can tell you is that even China is not happy what is happening on the ground in Myanmar.
How do you know that?
They have clearly expressed that they are not happy with what's happening on the country. They have approached us to talk, to dialogue together, but we are saying that how can we dialogue when they continue to kill the people on the ground and the streets of our country?
So China, you're saying, is brokering a dialogue between people like you who are speaking against the military, and the same China also called the coup a mere reshuffle.
In the way they have China Ministry Affairs has already publicly stated that they want to bring all the party together to come into dialogue table. So they have proposed that all party dialogue together. Yeah, China has proposed all party dialogue together, but from our stand is very clear. We cannot dialogue, we cannot go to dialogue unless these military generals killing our own people on the street. So we demand that they have, for us to go for dialogue, they need to release all of the detainees, including our presidents and our state councillor, Dr. Sasa, and then stop the killing the people of Myanmar on the streets. And then only we can talk about dialogue. So that's not happening what we see right now.
What does the worsening situation mean for India and the neighbors of Myanmar? Do you think that your country is descending into a civil war?
If there is no international actions, if there is no actions from democratic and free world to help us to restore democracy and freedom in the country, of course, there is no limit by this regime have. They will continue to kill the people, and there's many, many more bloody days coming ahead, bloody months, bloody year even. And that situation, of course, I'm afraid my country will go through the greatest civil war that we have never seen before.
What do you want India to do?
Next month, India is going to be the chair of UN Security Council. So we will need great and strong India leadership in UN Security Council to pressure UN Security Councils to immediately come with a resolution that is acceptable to the people of Myanmar, and that is democratic. That is the base of the freedom. And also we need India to be more outspoken about anti-military regime, because this military regime is not helpful to the people of Myanmar. They are not helping India. No, they are now bringing the whole region into chaos. So it will bring to our region into shame, into international stage, because having a very unstable neighbor is very shame for all of us. So I think it's India leadership that will bring more humanitarian help to this very deadly situation in the country of their neighbor, and also in the globally, we need India leadership.
Do you think in hindsight that Aung San Suu Kyi made a mistake when she defended the military generals in Geneva that also eroded her credibility internationally?
Yes, some mistake has been done, and then I don't like to go back to the past, because we can't do anything what we have done in the past and what happened in the past. And I just can tell you that her situation was very, very difficult. And how do you run the country when there is 5 top cabinet members of the government came from military generals who always hold the smoky guns against her? So it was a very, very difficult situation in her side. But I can tell you that under her administration, education has been improved, healthcare has been improved, electrification has been improved. There's so many positive that do happen.
That's all very well, but you can't wish away the past. Do you today admit, Ambassador on WION, that the democratically elected government of Myanmar under Aung San Suu Kyi failed to safeguard the rights of the Rohingya population, and that is the first step towards the slippery slope your country went down, and now you have a coup?
Well, this military coup and our brothers and sisters Rohingya issue has nothing to do with it. In fact, the Rohingya issue, and it was the military generals.
It is. You defended the military's genocide against the Rohingyas because it was more important for the government to remain in power then. And now the government has been overturned. And so everyone is feeling the heat. And so people are coming out and speaking against the very same
Let
generals.
me tell you, if you like to go back to the past, I mean, these military generals are the ones who have committed crime against humanity to our ethnic minority people, Kachin, Karen, Mo, Rakhine, Shan, Chin, for the last 72 years. We should not forget. These are the same military generals who have committed crime against humanity and ethnic cleanses many, many years, many times. 1988, they killed hundreds of peaceful protesters. 1997.
There was no democracy then. There was no democratic government then in Myanmar. When this happened with the Rohingyas, in the latest instance, there was a democratically elected government that failed to do anything for its own people, only to remain in power.
As I said again, these are the military regime. This military regime, the military generals are the one who should be taken to be account. There's no Aung San Suu Kyi who are killing the people of Myanmar or Rohingya. It is again the same military regime who have killed so many people in our country, unfortunately. So no one should be standing with them, and it's enough is enough. Of course, as I said again, some mistake has been done in the last 5 years, but again, as I said, it's a very difficult shoes. If you wear her shoes, it's just impossible to govern the government or the country, to run a country, when you have got the military regime's upper hand.
Thank you very much for joining us, and we wish you all the best in your endeavor to restore democracy.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Every year, the United States releases a human rights report. All countries under the sun feature in it except one, America itself. Because the land of the free can do no wrong. The report is an exercise in self-importance, a reaffirmation of America's position as a global policeman. But who exactly left them in charge? No one. The US thinks it is destined to lead the world. But when leadership is imposed, it is called an autocracy, a word that Antony Blinken used liberally on Tuesday. He was unveiling the latest human rights report. It details the events of 2020. Blinken declared that the trend lines of human rights are moving in the wrong direction. Almost every major country has been criticized in the report, except, of course, America's close allies. What about India? There are 68 pages in the report on India, accusations of extrajudicial killings, torture, political arrests, crackdown on journalists, censorship and religious persecution. There are also some words of praise, the efforts made to integrate Jammu and Kashmir, the restoration of internet services, and an indictment of insurgents who kill and torture Indian security forces. The problem is, India never asked for this review. Neither did any of the other countries. America's judgment is unsolicited. The reports are prepared behind closed doors. The information is collected from random sources. NGOs, academics, and activists contribute to the report, and their opinions are influenced by their politics. And the US laps it up completely when convenient. There's another interesting pattern in the report. It's all praises for American allies. The politics of human rights is clearly visible. One example in this report is on Israel and Palestine. Before Donald Trump, the report was titled Israel and Occupied Territories. Donald Trump renamed it to Israel, West Bank and Gaza. And Joe Biden has decided to stick with it. Do you see what's happening here? America has weaponized the human rights report. We are not the only ones saying this. Every year the US is criticized for its holier-than-thou attitude, and every year Washington comes up with the same reply.
We'll hear from some countries, as we do every year, that we have no right to criticize them because we have our own challenges to deal with. Well, we know we have work to do at home. That includes addressing profound inequities, including systemic racism. We don't pretend these problems don't exist or try to sweep them under the rug. We don't ignore them. We deal with them in the daylight with full transparency.
Challenges. That's what Antony Blinken calls human rights issues in America. It's surprising how even the terminology changes. Outside the US, they're called abuses and violations. In the US, they're challenges. Let's analyze what the Secretary just said. He has admitted that the US has work to do. But he also says that his country is open about it, that they do not sweep things under the rug. It's a very thin argument. Does a confession wash away guilt? It doesn't. It just makes the prosecutor's job a lot easier. Blinken says America deals with problems in broad daylight. Maybe the secretary needs to be reminded that George Floyd was also murdered in broad daylight. The helpless children at the Mexican border are also being separated from their mothers in broad daylight. This is the scene at Joe Biden's border detention centers. 100,000 arrests in February, 100,000. More than 2,000 minors held for more than 72 hours. That's beyond the legal limit set by American law. If only Blinken's report had a chapter on his own country, the pages would fill up fast. Xenophobia, police brutality, voter suppression, these are everyday problems in the US. And don't forget American troops. They're deployed around the world. They commit horrendous crimes in the name of security. Back home, they get a free pass. American presidents have carpet-bombed civilians and starved rival nations with sanctions. Most Americans agree the Iraq war was a mistake. Where are the sanctions on George Bush? Where is the stinging rebuke? The US keeps saying it is a project under work, a country striving for perfection. More than 240 years after independence, it is no closer to decency, let alone perfection. If America does want to preach, it might consider leading by example, or better yet, simply mind its own business. Blinken says Joe Biden will put human rights at the center of America's foreign policy. Well, we have a better suggestion. Why not put human rights at the center of America's domestic policy first? And I've said this repeatedly, before they sit in judgment of others, Western nations must first set their own house in order. The US is only one example. Here's another one. A few weeks back, a lot of noise was made in the British Parliament over India's farm laws. British lawmakers accused New Delhi of cracking down on farmers. They called the situation, quote-unquote, deeply concerning. Now what I'm about to show you could be distressing to watch. These images, these are British policemen. Most of them are men. There's one woman here dragging away a female protester. Her jeans falls down and she's left exposed in her underpants. Isn't this deeply concerning for British lawmakers? And this happened on the streets of Manchester, one of the most urban and metropolitan cities in the UK. A group of around 150 demonstrators had gathered to protest against a controversial policing bill, which we'll discuss in a bit. The protesters were largely peaceful and contained, but dozens of police officers arrived at the scene, prepared to crack down. They pushed and dragged away the protesters, claiming to be doing their job. Watch this. Now, as for the woman who was left partially exposed, the Manchester police say they've spoken to her and offered their apologies. They say the incident was not deliberate, but was indeed regrettable. Well, here's my question. How many times will British cops express their regret for forcefully detaining peaceful protesters? What happened in Manchester is not a one-off instance. On the 13th of March, a vigil was held in London for the killing of Sarah Everard. Everard was a 33-year-old woman who was murdered on her way home. A London cop is the main accused in this case, and I want to underline that. A London cop, policeman, has been accused of killing a woman on her way home. And as hundreds of women gathered to express their grief and pay respects, what did the London police do? It launched a crackdown, arrested the women who were just trying to raise concerns on women's safety. What has the British government done about this? It has tabled a new bill to further increase the powers of the police. The bill is called the Police Crime Sentencing and Court Bill. It is highly problematic. The bill gives the police the power of discretion to determine which protests are unlawful and must be dealt with force. This has led to a national outcry. Rights groups and civilians have hit the streets with the rallying call of "Kill the Bill." They say the bill will outlaw every protest that causes discomfort to 10 Downing Street and will make it easier to convict protesters over petty charges. In the last 2 weeks, Kill the Bill protests have taken place in Bristol, Birmingham, Brighton, Cambridge, Liverpool, Leeds, Manchester, Newcastle, Sheffield and York. The protests have been peaceful. The police response, not so much. We're about to show you some videos, and they will settle all your doubts about police brutality in the United Kingdom. You saw what happened there. They're using shields as weapons, hitting protesters with batons, shoving them to the ground, and when all else fails, simply tossing a police club in their faces. This is happening in the United Kingdom, where the Parliament is more concerned about debating rights and freedom in former colonies. To Brazil now. It is in the middle of a twin crisis, a pandemic that is claiming more than 300 lives every day, and an embattled president whose military chiefs have abandoned him. Jair Bolsonaro is losing support among his allies. He faces an uphill election, a re-election, next year. There are worries that Bolsonaro will stack the army and government with loyalists, and that if the popular vote is against him, possibly even lead a military takeover. Here's a report.
It's no secret, the Brazilian president is a huge fan of Donald Trump. Not just his politics, it seems, but even his television stints. Trump's "You're fired" line from The Celebrity Apprentice is Bolsonaro's new favorite. In the last 1 year alone, the president has booted out 3 health ministers, and on Monday he went on a firing spree. The foreign, defense and justice ministers were shown the door. So were his chief of staff, attorney general and government secretary. Impulsive, disruptive, call it whatever you want, but alarm bells are ringing in Brazil. Bolsonaro has not explained his decision. Only the change of guard at the Foreign Office was expected. Ousted Minister Ernesto Araujo was a serial denier. He denied globalization, he denied climate change, and he denied importing vaccines against COVID-19. The last one sealed his political fate. Bolsonaro's plan is to fill the cabinet with his loyalists. The president's popularity has hit rock bottom. His rhetoric on masks and lockdowns is losing currency. This reshuffle is the wiggle room he needed.
These changes have 2 fundamental objectives, which is what it seems so far: to provide a better relationship between the executive and its legislative support base, to reduce the pressure that Bolsonaro has suffered in various sectors of society and also from allies in the National Congress.
Bolsonaro plans to beat the Wuhan virus with politics. His hero tried doing the same. He ended up losing the White House. But Bolsonaro still has a card to play: the military. All 3 commanders of Brazil's armed forces have resigned. It is a first in the country's history. The president was keen on their support, but the military chiefs wanted nothing to do with politics. Brazil has seen this before. From 1964 to 1985, a military regime ruled the country. Since the return to democracy, the army has cultivated an apolitical image, an image Bolsonaro seems intent to shred. He openly boasts of the army's support. He sings praises of the dictatorship and circles back to his career as an army captain. Everyone in Brazil is thinking about it, but no one is saying it out loud. Is a military takeover on the cards? The vice president says there is zero risk of that, but closer to elections, things may change. Bolsonaro is up for re-election next year. Brazilians are unlikely to forget how their president left them defenseless against the virus. More than 317,000 deaths, most of them avoidable. To make matters worse, a political war horse is back in the fray. Former President Lula da Silva. He's armed with a clean chit from the Supreme Court in a corruption trial. Opinion polls put the 2 leaders in a dead heat. Bolsonaro authored the book on how not to handle a pandemic. Nothing in his record suggests he won't lead a military takeover. It would be disastrous for Brazil and disastrous for Latin America. 2 years back, Bolsonaro watched on as the Amazon rainforests burnt. Today, he's leading Brazil's democracy into arson. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
It's been a year since the WHO declared a pandemic, and I just realized I must have said this more than twice on the show tonight. So much has changed in the last 1 year. Most of us are yet to come to terms with a new normal. So let me ask you something. How many of you have actually perfected the art of working from home? How many of you have found the magical code of balancing Zoom meetings and babies? You'll be surprised how many people feel that they're still struggling. I came across this story earlier today that I want to share with you. A gibberish code was tweeted by the official handle of the US Strategic Command. Some said it was America's nuclear code, one that was accidentally leaked. Others claimed it was a critical password. Turns out it was none of the above. The Twitter manager of the US Strategic Command was working from home. He momentarily left his system unattended. You can guess what happened next. His child saw a golden opportunity and began playing with a keyboard. The end product was a 13-character long gibberish tweet from one of America's most important Twitter accounts. Moral of the story, lock your screen the next time you're leaving your laptop unattended. And if you have similar stories you want to share, please do write to us. With that, it's a wrap. We leave you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, I guess so.